Hi, welcome to Budget MTG Decks. All magic fun, all cards under $1. I'm David, and as you may have noticed, I do not have a co-host with me today. That is because everybody is super busy and I had to make a choice between either waiting and letting the video come out later or doing the video by myself. And I decided that I would like to get the video out sooner rather than later. So this time we're gonna have the video with just me. So also let me know what you think of this. You think, don't try and do this by yourself, or do you say, hey, if it means the videos can be a little more consistent, we don't mind a video without a co-host every now and then. So let me know in the comments below. But today we're going to be talking about a fun and effective EDH deck that you can build without breaking the bank. And we have only one build rule, which means all the cards have to be $1 or less, with exception of the commander. And we do have an awesome commander for you today. We have Sen Triplets. For 2, a white, a blue, and a black. So for 5 mana, we get a 3/3 human wizard. Now, Sen Triplets is an extremely powerful commander. It's also the reason why this deck is actually one of the most expensive decks that we build, because a lot of the cost is actually right here in the commander. Sen Triplets states that at the beginning of your upkeep, you choose a target opponent. This turn, that player can't cast spells or activated abilities and plays with his or her hand revealed. You may play cards from that player's hand this turn. Now, playing cards also includes playing their lands, casting their spells, the whole shebang. So what is going to be the role of this commander? Now, it basically means that we're going to be playing our opponent's best stuff, which is nice. It's kind of like, that's the theme of the deck, it's kind of mind control. We play their deck. And it also kind of stops our opponent from countering our stuff, because in our turn, we just pick the opponent that has access to a lot of counterspells, for example. We're going to pick that person, and then they won't be able to counter our stuff anymore. We can cast their things. And of course, every turn we can switch it to a different opponent. So it's really a very oppressive commander, and rightly so, and also lots and lots of fun to play. But we're going to need a few different cards to make this deck work. We're going to need, of course, the commander. We have 16 artifact cards because we have an artifact sub-theme in here as well. We've got some removal because we need some control. We've got a few win condition cards, some utility, and we have, to end it off, we have 38 lands. So the ideal turn progression is turn 1, piece of removal. Turn 2, some ramp. Turn 3, some protection for Sen Triplets. Turn 4, our commander. Turn 5, some mind controls. That's when we take over something of our opponents. And turn 6, we're going to do some extra draw. Well, that is the ideal turn progression. Let's get right started with all the artifacts. We divided the artifacts into synergy cards, so cards that synergize with artifacts, recursion cards, and protection cards. Now, the reason why this deck is not only a mind control deck, but also an artifact sub-theme deck is because not only are Sen Triplets in the perfect colors for artifact theme, but also Sen Triplets are artifact creature themselves, which means they'll get a lot of benefits from these synergy cards. So let's look at the first synergy card, and that is Sidri Galvanic Genius for white, a blue, and a black. So for 3 mana, we get a 2/2 Human Artificer with the first ability. For 1 blue, target non-creature artifact becomes an artifact creature with power and toughness equal to its converted mana cost until the end of turn. So we can turn our mana rocks, for example, into creatures. Don't see this happening very often, but we could use it against our opponent's stuff, of course. And the second ability, which is very, very useful for a white and a black, target artifact creature gains Death Touch and Lifelink until the end of turn. Now, this is huge, especially when we've got some of our bigger artifact creatures attacking in, and also very nice early on in the game, kind of as a deterrent for people to attack against us, because the potential to instant speed give one of our artifacts, which could just be a pathetic little 1/1 artifact creature, giving it that Death Touch and being able to trade with our opponent's biggest stuff is a really big dissuader. And of course, the lifelink later on in the game can pull us back if we've taken too much damage early on. Next is Thermal Navigator. For 3 mana, we get a 2/2 artifact creature. We can sacrifice an artifact, this includes itself, to give it flying until the end of turn. So essentially, this thing can sack itself. This thing can also sack other artifacts, which is nice for when you need a sacrifice outlet. A good example of this is when somebody's trying to exile your artifacts, or when you want to sacrifice an artifact for value to be able to recur it later on. Rusted Slasher is next for 4. It's an artifact creature. It's a 4/1, but that's not really why it's in there. It also allows us to sacrifice an artifact to regenerate Rusted Slasher. Now, you may think, okay, it's nice. We can smack with a 4/1. We don't have to worry about it dying because we can sack an artifact. Just use it the same way as Thermal Navigator. Nice little sack outlet to be able to recur something later on as well and to protect it from being exiled. Then we move on to Wrath Compassion Ship's Mage for 2, a white and a blue. So for 4 mana, we get a 3/3 Human Wizard. This one's got Flash, which is super interesting, which means that this thing's going to come as a surprise. We can cast it as an instant speed at any time. We can cast an instant, so it's going to come in as a surprise. It's a flyer, 3/3 flyer. You know, it's nothing to sniff at, but the ability is very nice because it states that you can cast historic spells as though they had Flash. Now, historic spells are artifact, legendaries, and sagas. Now, there's no sagas in this deck, but legendaries there are, because obviously that means that we can cast our commander instant speed. And of course, artifacts, there's a artifact sub-theme. So, Wrath Compassion, super nice. Don't cast it in your main phase. If you do have the mana up, just wait for turns to rotate around until it's the end of your opponent's last turn. Play this or play it as a surprise. If you got extra mana, you can do loads of nice stuff. The fact that you could play your commander instant speed is huge with this thing. And of course, remember that if you got enough mana, you can play both of them in the same turn. Next, we have Thopter Spy Network for 2 and 2 blue. It's an enchantment. It states that at the beginning of your upkeep, if you control an artifact, put a 1/1 colorless artifact creature token with flying onto the battlefield. Well, there's going to be a big chance we will, especially because we got all the early mana rocks. And it also states that whenever one or more artifact creatures you control deal combat damage to a player, draw a card. That's definitely going to be happening because we're going to come in early, have a mana rock, we're going to get a little Thopter. It's going to be a 1/1 flyer early on in the game. It's going to be unblockable, most likely. We're going to attack with it. And it doesn't matter if you attack with 1 or with 50, the point is we're always going to draw 1 card. Very nice little card advantage right there. Filigree Angel is next for a whopping 5, 2 white and a blue. So for 8 mana, it's a 4/4 flying artifact creature angel. So it's nice that it's also an artifact, which means we can recur it later on. And it states that when it enters the battlefield, we're going to gain 3 life for each artifact you control. This card is super nice to get us back in the game. A little bit on the expensive side, but also being a 4/4 flyer is nothing to sniff at. Then we move on to the recursion cards. The first one, super undercosted, Myr Retriever for 2 mana. It's a 1/1 artifact creature, and it states that when it dies, we're going to return another artifact creature from our graveyard to our hand. This is, of course, super nice that if we have a sacrifice outlet, you know, people don't always want to block this. You don't want to, they might not attack you in a way that you can chump block with this. So it's good to have a little sack outlet so we can just make sure that it dies whenever we want, and we can get that nice little other artifact back to our hand. Next, Junk Diver. For 3 mana, it's a 1/1 artifact bird. This one's got flying. Same thing, really. When it dies, return another artifact card from our graveyard to our hand. Now, as you can see already with these two, we can already loop them should we want to do that. And next is Skeleton Shard. For 3 mana, it's an artifact, and we could pay 3 mana and tap it, or pay a single black and tap it to return target artifact creature card from your graveyard to your hand. It would be nice to be able to get Myr Retriever or Junk Diver with this back again, but there's plenty of other great artifact creatures that we can get back for such a cheap investment. And the last one of the recursion cards, how could we not include this? Shroom the Hegemon for 3, a white, a blue, and a black. So for 6 mana, we get a 5/5 flyer. And when this creature enters the battlefield, you may return target artifact creature from your graveyard right to the battlefield. So it doesn't even go to our hand first, it goes straight to the battlefield. Very nice. What can I say? This gives great combos in this deck. So definitely always happy to see this. Then we move on to the protection cards. So these are the cards we're mostly going to be using to keep Sen Triplets alive, because Sen Triplets is going to paint a huge target on your head. Nobody wants to be targeted at the beginning of your upkeep and made sure that they can't pretty much do anything in your turn, and that they have to show their entire hand to everybody, and that you're going to be playing their stuff. Nobody wants that. So they're going to want Sen Triplets gone. So this is going to keep them alive for a little bit longer. First one is Swiftfoot Boots for 2 mana. Equipment artifact. Equipped creature has hexproof and haste. So this is really about the hexproof. keep Sen Triplets alive. Next is Joyrest Toolbox. For 2, it's an artifact creature, a 1/1. And it states that for 2 mana, we can regenerate target artifact creature. Of course, it can regenerate itself, but Sen Triplets are also artifact creatures, or is an artifact creature. So for a measly 2 mana of any color, which is nice because you're playing 3 colors, so we don't always have specific access to colors. So for 2 mana, we can regenerate it. And of course, we can use this ability multiple times, instant speed, to react to perhaps a board wipe or something to make sure we can protect a lot of our artifact creatures. Then we have Gift of Immortality. For 2 and a white, we're going to enchant a creature. If that enchanted creature dies, we're going to return that card to the battlefield under our control, under its owner's control, and return Gift of Immortality to the battlefield attached to that creature at the beginning of the next end step. So this, of course, essentially means that people will not be able to remove this with sorcery speed things, because they're going to kill it and then it's going to come back, it's going to be protected again, so they're going to need to kill it first one time, and then before the end of your turn, something with instant speed, they're going to have to kill it before Gift of Immortality attaches itself once again to Sen Triplets. So this is super, super nice enchantment to protect Sen Triplets with. Then we have a classic Indestructibility for 3 and a white. So for 4 mana, it's also an aura, and it simply states that enchanted permanent is now indestructible. Needless to say, that makes it extremely difficult to get rid of Sen Triplets, other than, of course, lowering its toughness or exiling them. So it's going to keep your Sen Triplets alive for a long time. People are going to have to probably target the enchantment first to get rid of it. Then we move on to Indomitable Archangel for 2 and 2 white. So for 4 mana, we get a 4/4 Flying Angel. That is already aggressively costed. This is a nice beater as well. And on top of that, it's got Metalcraft, which means that artifacts you control have Shroud as long as you control 3 or more artifacts. Needless to say, in this deck, not hard to get to that Metalcraft. You're definitely going to have it by the time a Sen Triplets comes out, and which basically means you can have Sen Triplets protected with Shroud, and on top of that, you're also going to have a 4/4 flyer that you can attack with. So that's going to be putting you in a really nice position. And then finally, we have Padim, Console of Innovation for 3 and a blue. So for 4 mana, we get a 1/4 Vidalcan Artificer. And it states that artifacts you control have hexproof. All right, well, slightly better than the Shroud, obviously, because Shroud means we can't target Sen Triplets with, for example, Indestructibility. But with the hexproof that Padim affords us, we would still be able to. But the hexproof by itself is already pretty nice to protect the Sen Triplets. And additionally, of course, it also protects all your other artifacts, which is nothing to sniff at. Additionally, at the beginning of your upkeep, if you control the artifact with the highest converted mana cost or tied for the highest converted mana cost, you're going to draw a card. We've seen already a bunch of artifact creatures that have extremely high converted mana cost, so it's not unusual for us to draw that card as well. Those are the artifacts. Let's have a look at the removal. We divided the removal spells into 3 categories: the counterspells, the targeted removal spells, and the board wipes. We're going to start with our counterspells, and the very first one is Counterspell. For 2 blue, it's an instant that allows us to counter target spell. Now, this is one of the first decks where we're once again able to include Counterspell because it has recently dropped to a budget card, and we have another video of must-have cards that have recently dropped under $1. You can click on the card on your screen right now to check that out. But Counterspell is recently now below $1, so that is a super, super nice include for Sen Triplets. Next is Dissipate for 1 and 2 blue. It's also an instant that allows us to counter spell, but if a spell is countered this way, we're also going to exile it instead of putting it into our opponent's graveyards, which is nice against people with graveyard strategies. Make sure that they don't have access to that anymore. And that is very similar to Void Shatter for 1 and 2 blue. It's a devoid. That's not really relevant, but once again, we can counter a target spell, and if the spell is countered, we're going to exile it instead of putting it into the graveyard. Then we have Fairy Trickery for 1 and 2 blue, so exactly the same. This time, we're going to be able to counter a non-fairy spell. Okay, so that is kind of specific. I don't think it's going to be relevant very often, but once again, if we counter it, we're going to be able to exile it instead of putting it into the graveyard, because we kind of like to use our graveyard. We don't really want other people to use their graveyard. Then we go on to Rewind for 2 and 2 blue. It's an instant. We're going to counter target spell and untap 4 lands. This is super nice for keeping it open. We're going to counter something, then we're going to untap our 4 lands, which means we once again have the mana open to counter with another spell or with a removal or whatever our heart's desire. So that is super, super nasty. People were never expecting that. And then finally we have Aether Snatch for 4 and 2 blue. So for 6 mana, it's an instant. And this time we're not really countering something. We're gaining control of target spell, and you may choose new targets for it. But it's also important to remember that if that spell becomes a permanent, we're going to control that permanent. It's going to come onto the battlefield under our control. So here we're starting to see a little bit that mind control theme is starting to come through. Not only can we redirect a removal spell, for example, towards instead of hitting our creatures, it can have it hit our opponent's creatures. But if somebody casts a super powerful creature, we just say, you know what, now that creature works for us, which is super nice. Then we move on to the targeted removal. First one is Nihil Spellbomb for 1. It's an artifact. We can tap it and sacrifice it to exile all cards from target player's graveyard. Always nice to have a little bit of graveyard hate for people who want to be using that too much. We want to use ours. We don't want other people to use theirs. And of course, it's an artifact, which means we can recur it quite easily, so we can use it repeatedly. And additionally, when this card is put into the graveyard from the battlefield, if we pay a black, we also draw a card. That is super sweet, and we will always want to do that. Then we have a Dispeller's Capsule for a single white. It's an artifact. Once again, important. It means we can recur it easily. For 2 and a white and tapping it, we're going to sacrifice it and then destroy target artifact or enchantment. Never neglect your artifact and enchantment removal in your commander decks. People always have stuff. Make sure you have a way to be able to get rid of those pesky enchantments and artifacts, and this is a perfect one because we can probably use this one repeatedly. Then we have Dispatch for single white. It's an instant that allows us to tap target creature, but if we have Metalcraft, which means if we control 3 or more artifacts, we're going to exile that creature instead. Now, that essentially means in 90% of the time, and it should actually be 100% of the times when you actually cast this, it'll be a single white for instant speed exile target creature. That is nasty. Then we move on to Mortify for 1, a white, and a black. So for 3 mana, it's an instant, destroy target creature or enchantment. It's nice, it's got instant speed, gives us the flexibility of hitting a creature or an enchantment. And next we move on to Utter End for 2, a white and a black. So for 1 more expensive, 1 generic mana more. It's also an instant, but this time we're going to exile target non-land permanent. Substantially better. Not only does it hit non-land permanents, which means it hits everything, including the creature or enchantment, which Mortify does, but additionally it doesn't just destroy, but it also exiles. We're just be able to hit those pesky indestructible gods that people like playing with. Then we have Guild for 3 and a black. It's a sorcery, so not instant speed this time, but it allows us to exile target creature. And we're going to put a colorless artifact token named Gold onto the battlefield, which we can sacrifice to add 1 mana of any color. So it's a nice little mana fixing. It's removal, able to hit those indestructible creatures or a god if it's a creature. All very nice. And then the last one of the targeted is Aethersworn Educator for 4 and a blue. It's a 4/4 flyer. We have a lot of nice flyers in this deck, and for I think very aggressively costed. And that's not even talking about the abilities, because let's have a look at this creature's ability, and that is for 1 a black and a white, and tapping it, we're going to destroy target creature or enchantment, which basically means this is a Mortify on a stick, and we can do this every single turn, and that is just insane, especially if we can find ways to untap this creature. And guess what? It already has that tacked on by itself already for 2 and a blue. We can untap Aethersworn Educator as a surprise. And if you've got tons of mana, we're going to be doing this repeatedly. Usually you're not even swinging with this thing because you're just destroying so much of your opponent's board with it. It is super powerful. And of course, the nice thing about it, it is an artifact creature, which means we can recur it with this deck. Then we move on to the board wipes. First one is Displacement Wave for X and 2 blue. It's a sorcery. We're going to return all non-land permanents with converted mana cost X or less to their owner's hands. Now, why do we like to return stuff to our opponent's hands? Because we can actually cast stuff from our opponent's hands from the one that we targeted that turn, which means it's a little bit nice, a little bit better. And additionally, we don't really play heavy token strategies, which means that we can use this to just play 2, pay 2, and then we're going to return all tokens back to our opponent's hands, and it won't affect us in any way. Aetherize is next for 3 and a blue, so for 4 mana, it's an instant. We're going to return all attacking creatures to their owner's hand. This is a nice little one-sided board wipe against anybody who's foolish enough to target us. We can always leave mana open because we have a lot of instant speed spells that we can cast. We got Counterspells. And this is another one of those spells, which means that in our opponent's turns we can leave our mana open, and when they attack us, we were expecting that we had a counterspell or something, and they attack us, and then we've got this. It blows them out entirely. It's super nice, and of course we'll also be able to cast stuff from their hand, which we have returned. Then we have a Divine Reckoning for 2 and 2 white. It's a sorcery. Each player chooses a creature he or she controls and destroys the rest with a flashback of 5 and 2 white, which means we can cast it from our graveyard one more time. The strength of this card is incredible because it's very important for us to keep Sen Triplets alive, and this allows us to do that while maintaining control over the rest of the battlefield. And additionally, later on in the game, we can use it one more time, and people have almost always forgotten that you've got this in your graveyard, and later on, 7 is not a high price to pay to be able to do this 2 times. Then we have a Cataclysmic Gearhulk for 3 and 2 white. It's an artifact creature, 4/5. It's incredible this card is under $1. It is amazing. It's got vigilance as well. And when it enters the battlefield, each player chooses an artifact, a creature, an enchantment, and a planeswalker from among the non-land permanents they control, and sacrifice the rest. So we're going to be resetting the board again. We, of course, have got lots of artifact creatures, so we can choose which one, whether it counts as an artifact or a creature. And Cataclysmic Gearhulk, same thing. We can keep it around. We can also let it sacrifice it, let it die, and then find a way to recur it, bring it back, and do it all over again later on. Then we have Coastal Breach for 6 and a blue, so for 7 mana, but it has Undaunted, which means it's going to cost us 1 generic less for each opponent we have, which is going to reduce the cost incredibly, and it also allows us to return all non-land permanents to their owner's hand. Yeah, sometimes, it hits Sen Triplets, but sometimes we got to reset the board when everything gets a little bit too crazy. We should return everything back to our opponent's hands, to everybody's hands, including our own. And then finally, the last of the board wipes, that is Soulquake for 3, 2 blue, and 2 black. So for quite a hefty price, it's a sorcery, and it's going to return all creatures in play, and all creature cards in all graveyards back to their owner's hands. So this is cool. We like to recur stuff. We like to just cast stuff back that was in our graveyard. We like to get some looping in there. This allows us to get all these creatures back from the graveyard, recast them once again. It is quite expensive, this spell, but it resets the board as well because it also returns all the creatures from play back to their hand. And of course, all the artifacts that we have that are not creatures, they're going to be sitting pretty. And of course, the enchantments that we have. That is it for the removal. Let's have a look at some of the win cons. Although this deck does not really need a win condition per se, because we are playing our opponent's stuff, there are 2 aspects which allow us to kind of speed the game up a little bit, and it also plays in with the theme of this deck. And the first one, that is mind control, and the second one, that is some beater. So let's have a look at the mind control cards first. The first one is Steel Enchantment. For 2 blue, we're going to enchant an enchantment, and then we're going to gain control of that enchantment. So that's cool. If there's like a global enchantment that somebody just has on their table, which is super awesome, is annoying you, then we can just take that enchantment. Remember, it's not going to work on auras because those, even though you control the enchantment, it's still going to stay attached to the creature that it was enchanting. So you can't really take control of auras and put it on another creature. But any other global enchantments, they're all fair game. Next, we have Steel Artifact for 2 and 2 blue. We're going to enchant an artifact, and then we can take that artifact. Nice. We like artifacts, so why don't we take our opponent's best artifact? Then we move on to stuff that takes control of creatures, and that is Control Magic for 2 and 2 blue. It's an aura, and we're going to enchant a creature, and then now we control enchanted creature. These kind of effects are extremely powerful. Why? Because it actually removes a creature from your opponent. There's removal. Essentially, they don't have a creature anymore, and it adds a creature to your side. You're getting an extra creature. So with one card, you're doing a double whammy and hitting them twice, really, by removing something great of theirs and adding something great to yourself. And it's always going to be the best thing on the battlefield. People don't really have, sure, people have stuff to remove auras, enchantments, and artifacts, for example, but this is the kind of stuff they don't really want to be using it on. And one thing we do also have to remember is that when we gain control of a creature. We didn't gain control of it. Well, we didn't have control of it since the beginning of our upkeep, which means it will have summoning sickness. So even if it didn't have summoning sickness before, as soon as we gain control of it, it moves to our side of the battlefield. Now all of a sudden it does have summoning sickness, so we need something like Swiftfoot Boots to give it haste so we can attack with it right away. Otherwise, just wait a turn. I mean, we have it now permanently pretty much. Persuasion is very similar to that for 3 and 2 blue. Once again, we're going to gain control of target creature. Now we have the best thing. So we're not only playing cards from our opponent's hands with Sen Triplets, we're seeing what they have in their hands, but we're also taking slowly stuff from the battlefield. And finally, Mind Control, exactly the same, but now, for the same price as Persuasion. So for 3 and 2 blue, we're going to be controlling Enchanted Creature. That is super, super annoying for our opponent, especially when they invested a lot of mana in something really cool. Then we have some beaters. These are just artifact creatures pretty much that allow us to win a little bit faster. They're not crucial for the deck, but they're a lot of fun. Tidehollow Strix, for example, for a blue and a black. It's a 2/1 flyer with Death Touch. Is this thing going to be winning games by itself? No, but actually the fact that it's got Death Touch and flying is a great rattlesnake effect at the beginning of the game. And the fact that it's an artifact creature, which we can recur it. It is actually quite a nice card in the deck. Enigma Sphinx is next for 4, a white, a blue, and a black. So for 7 mana, we get a 5/4 flyer. Once again, these huge flyers are not to be underestimated in this deck. And additionally, when it's put into the graveyard from the battlefield, we're going to put it into our library 3rd from the top. So of course we can sacrifice this thing with one of our sacrifice outlets. It's going to go back into our library. We can cast it again a few turns later. And additionally, when we do cast it, we're going to exile cards from the top of our library until we exile a non-land card that costs less, and we're going to be casting that for free. So it's nice to be able to recast this card multiple times, and we don't always have to sack it because just having a 5/4 in the air that netted us a free card on top of that is nothing to sniff at. And then we have Sphinx of the Steel Wind for 5, a white, a blue, and a black. So for 8 mana, yes, it's a lot, but we get a 6/6 flyer with First Strike, Vigilance, Lifelink, and Protection from red and Protection from green. Needless to say, when we can search for cards, this is one of the cards that can end the game super fast. Keeps you in the game, stops people from attacking. You can attack with it. You can block with it the turn after because it's got Vigilance. The Lifelink brings you back. It is insanity. This card is super nice. And once again, we're so happy that it's an artifact creature. Then we have Colossus of Arcrus for 8 mana. Yes, these things are expensive. We get a 10/10 Golem. It's a defender and it's indestructible. It's also an artifact, which is nice. Though this thing usually doesn't leave the battlefield very often because it already has indestructible from itself. And when we pay an additional 10 mana, we're going to give it Monstrosity 10, which means it's going to become a 20/20 with Trample, and it's going to lose Defender, which is going to end games super, super fast. This is also one of those cards you love to see late game because it really swings the game back in your favor. And the last of the beaters is Inkwell Leviathan for 7 and 2 blue. So for 9 mana, quite steep once again, but we do get a artifact creature. Once again, it's a 7/11. This thing is huge. Island Walk, which means it's going to be able to attack all our opponents with an island with impunity because it won't be able to be blocked. And it's got Trample, which means that if they don't have an island and they do decide to block it, well, it's still got Trample is going to go over a lot of stuff. And it also has Shroud, which means it won't be able to be targeted by spells or abilities. So the removal spell is not going to do anything. All the red board wipes are pretty much not going to do anything. They got to hit the entire table to be able to get rid of this thing. And if they do, it's an artifact creature. We're probably going to find a way to get it back again. Those are the win conditions. Let's have a look at the utility cards. We divided the utility cards into 2 categories: the card draw, when needs a little bit of card advantage, and the ramp card, which were super important because we saw that a lot of these spells can be quite expensive. So let's start off with some card advantage with the draw, and the first one is Treasure Mage for 2 and a blue. So for 3 mana, we get a 2/2 Human Wizard, not an artifact this time. But when Treasure Mage enters the battlefield, you may search your library for an artifact card with converted mana cost 6 or greater, reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle your library. Okay, That is pretty nice. We saw a couple of these beaters. We saw a couple of other creatures with nice abilities, like the Sphinx that gains you life, for example, but just Sphinx of the Steel Wind, stuff like that. There's a lot of very powerful creatures, artifact creatures, that we can get back, that we can get from our library, which is going to swing the game in our favor later on. Sphinx Summoner is next for 3, a blue and a black. So for 5 mana, we get a 3/3 flyer. Once again, nothing to sniff at. 3/3 flyer can really start doing damage in the air. Additionally, when it enters the battlefield, you may search your library for an artifact creature card, reveal it, put it into your hand. If you do, shuffle your library. Same story here, pretty much. This time, you're not limited to a high converted mana cost, but let's be realistic. If you're already casting this for 5 mana, you're probably going to be looking for something quite hefty. And this deck has plenty of options that can help you out. Tamio's Journal is next for 5. It's a legendary artifact. At the beginning of your upkeep, we're going to investigate, which means we're going to put a clue artifact token onto the battlefield, which we can pay 2 mana for and sacrifice to draw a card. We can also just every turn allow those clues to accumulate and then tap this artifact, sacrifice 3 clues, and then search your library for a card, put it into our hand, shuffle our library. That's not an artifact. Doesn't have to be creature artifact, doesn't have to be converted mana cost, just any card, this is a catch-all. Almost exclusively pop it down and wait till you've got those 3 those clue tokens, and then afterwards you can just always start sacking them, but always keep those 3 available, because being able to search for any card at any point in time, instant speed, is just insanity. Beautiful. And the last of the draw is Future Sight for 2 and 3 blue. So for 5 mana, it's an enchantment. And we're going to play with the top card of our library revealed. And we may play the top card of our library, which means that, if, for example, if we start the turn, we draw a card, we reveal a card. Let's say we drew a land, but there's a land there, that we could play the land from the top of our library. We just keep the other land in our hand. Then we flip that card over from our library again. Hey, it's a spell. Let's play that. We can get so much card advantage by just playing as much from the top of our library as possible and leaving the rest of the cards that we already drew in our hand for that additional card advantage. That's super, super sick, and I absolutely love this card. Then we move on to the ramp cards. These are all going to be artifact based, and we're going to try to keep them as cheap as possible. First one is Felwar Stone for 2 mana. It's an artifact. We can tap it to add 1 mana of any color that a land an opponent could produce. Now, this is important, number one, because we're playing 3 colors, so most likely one of those colors we will be able to play. It will be one of those colors which is relevant, which our opponents can play. And additionally, we want to play stuff from our opponent's hands. And it could be that, for example, we're not playing green, and if we choose an opponent and they're playing green, they'll have a land that can produce green, which means Felwar Stone will also be able to produce green, which gives us that little added benefit and be able to more easily cast stuff from our opponent's hands, even if we don't share a color with them. Orzhov Signet for 2 mana. We can pay a mana and tap it to give us a white and a black, which is very similar to Orzhov Signet also for 2 mana, which we can pay a mana to give us a white and a blue. Then we have Ethereum Sculptor for 1 and a blue. We get a 1/2 Vidalcan Artificer. This guy is an artifact, which is super nice, and it actually discounts all our artifacts by making all artifact spells we cast 1 generic mana less. So not only, so it's not really ramp, it just reduces the cost of everything pretty much, which is very similar to Foundry Inspector. For 3, we get a 3/2 artifact creature. Artifact spells you cost 1 less to cast. Super, super nice. This is very, very beneficial to be able to reduce the cost, because almost everything is an artifact in this deck. And then we have Burnish Heart for 3. We get a 2/2 Elk artifact creature, and we can pay 3 and sacrifice it to search our library for 2 basic land cards, put it on the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle our library. Once again, this is a perfect target to recur. And with Ethereum Sculptor and Foundry Inspector on the battlefield, we just recast it for a single mana every single time, which is nothing to sniff at. Then we move on to Manalith. For 3 mana, it's an artifact, and it gives us 1 mana of any color. So now these ones are a little bit more expensive, so not the 2 mana ramp anymore, but 3. Why? Because we want to be able to access any color. Anything our opponent's playing, we want to be able to play it from their hand. Darksteel Ingot is exactly the same for 3. However, this time it's going to be indestructible, which is also nice that people will not be able to remove this piece of artifact unless they're going to use exile stuff against it, which they're not going to. So it's pretty much guaranteed, always going to be on the battlefield. Spectral Searchlight for 3 also taps for a mana of any color, but we could choose it to give that mana to any player. Most likely we won't be doing that, but it's a nice little political tool. And then we have Cultivator's Caravan for 3. It's also an artifact that taps for mana of any color, but it's also a vehicle, which means that we can crew it for 3, which means any number of creatures totaling power 3 or more, we can tap them and then turn this into a 5/5 creature and attack with it. But we do have to remember that this piece of artifact or artifacts always have summoning sickness. So if you play this on a turn, you won't be able to crew it immediately and attack with it. But what you can do is, if this thing was already on the battlefield, doesn't have summoning sickness, and then a new creature comes in, we are able to tap that creature, even though it has summoning sickness, to crew the Cultivator's Caravan and turn it into a 5/5. Nice little surprise there. Blinkmoth Urn is next for 5 mana. It's an artifact. At the beginning of each player's pre-combat main phase, so their first main phase, if Inkblot Urn is untapped, that player adds colorless mana to his or her mana pool for each artifact he or she controls. We're going to have loads of artifacts, which means at the beginning of our main phase, we're going to be getting tons of extra mana. And if we have a way to tap this, then of course we can deny our opponent. But most likely we're going to be getting far more benefits than our opponents from this, so it doesn't really matter. And then we move on to the last of the ramp cards, and that is Revel in Riches for 4 and a black. It's an enchantment, and it states that whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, we're going to create a colorless treasure artifact token with tap, sacrifice this artifact, add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. What's really cool about this is, of course, as the game progresses, stuff is dying, we're getting artifacts, which counts towards our artifacts, but we can also use it to mana ramp into stuff. And additionally, at the beginning of your upkeep, if you control 10 or more treasures, we win the game. So that is a very unfun way to win the game. We don't recommend that, so just use up those treasures to get extra mana and ramp into your cool finishers. Those are all the utility cards. Let's have a look at the lands. Naturally, we can't really have a deck if we do not have the proper mana to play the spells. So we divided the lands into 4 plains, 9 islands, 4 swamps, and 21 non-basic lands. We're going to start with Tranquil Cove. It comes in tapped, and also gains a life when it enters the battlefield, but it gives us a white or a blue, which is very similar to Dismal Blackwater, which also comes in tapped and gives us a life, but gives us a blue or a black. And Scoured Barns, which also comes in tapped, also gives us a life, but gives us a white or a black, which means that's all the distribution of the colors that we want. Then we have Azorius Chancery, which also comes in tapped, but when it enters the battlefield, we're going to have to return a land we control back to our hand, and this one taps for white and blue at the same time. Dimir Aqueduct, exactly the same, but this one's going to give us blue and black at the same time. And identical to Orzhov Basilica, but this one's going to give us white and black. So there we go, the same color combinations again. Then we move on to Vivid Meadow, which is a land which also comes in tapped, gives us a white mana, but it also comes in with 2 charge counters, and we can tap it and remove a charge counter to give us mana of any color, which is nice because sometimes we want to play stuff from our opponent's hands and we don't have access to that color. So Vivid Meadow gives us that 2 times, that possibility. That's the same as Vivid Marsh. It's exactly the same, except this one taps for a black normally, and the same as Vivid Creek, which normally taps for a blue mana. Then we have Arcane Sanctum, also enters tapped, but we can tap it to give us a white, a blue, or a black, which is exactly the colors that we need, which we want to have access to. Then we have Transguild Promenade, also enters tapped, but when it enters, we're going to have to pay 1 mana, so probably going to tap another land when it comes in, which is a little bit of a disadvantage on that turn, but after that is going to tap for 1 mana of any color whenever we want, which is exactly the same as Rupture Spire, just a different name. Then we have Exotic Orchard, which does not come in tapped, but it only adds mana of any color that a land your opponent's control could produce. Once again, it's probably going to be one of the 3 colors that we need, and it also is going to give us a great chance to be able to play spells from our opponent's hands with the colors that we normally don't have access to. And then we have Mirrodin's Core, which also doesn't come in tapped. We just tap it for a colorless mana. We can also tap it, put a charge counter on it, and later on we can tap it and remove a charge counter for a mana of any color. Nice little flexibility there. And we also have Hold Up Settlement, which also doesn't come in tap. We just tap it for a colorless mana, but we can also tap this card and a creature which is not untapped which is untapped. And then we're going to add a mana of any color to our mana pool. Great example, for example, Sen Triplets. We're not going to be attacking with Sen Triplets. We just want it to sit there. So we can always pretty much tap Sen Triplets and hold out Settlement to give us a mana of any color. And then we have Phyrexian Core, taps for a colorless mana, but we can also pay a mana, tap it, and sacrifice an artifact to gain 1 life. Now, the 1 life is not really important, but we have a nice little instant speed sack outlet to be able to protect our artifacts. Or, for example, if we want to sack an artifact to be able to get into graveyard so we can recur it and play it again. Darksteel Citadel is an artifact land, indestructible, which is cool, and it also taps for a colorless, which means we can actually recur it with some of our graveyard recursion stuff for artifacts. Esper Panorama taps for a colorless, but we can also pay a mana, tap it, and sacrifice it to search for a plains, island, or swamp card and put it onto the battlefield tapped and shuffle our library. Perfect. Those are the colors that we need to search for. And then we have Myriad Landscape. Myriad Landscape enters the battlefield tapped. So once again, we got some cards that come in tapped. This one does tap for a colorless though, and we can also pay 2 mana and tap it and sacrifice it to search our library for 2 basic land cards that share a land type. So we can't look for 2 islands, for example. And we're going to put them on the battlefield tapped and shuffle our library. But it is 1 land that gives us 2 lands, so that's super nice. It's also one of those cards that have recently dropped to below $1. So pick them up. And then finally we have Terramorphic Expanse and Evolving Wilds. We can tap them, sacrifice them, search for our library for basic land, put on the battlefield tapped, and shuffle our library. That is actually it for all the lands. So let's have a look at the conclusion. Well, in conclusion, this deck is a lot of fun. Now, this is usually the part where it's really a lot of fun to, with your co-host, to discuss why this deck is fun and all the things that we discovered during playtesting, but I'll try my best to illustrate by myself what I thought was so great about it. It is a deck that is incredibly powerful. The less players are playing, the more powerful you are. So that means essentially either if you're playing one-on-one, you're completely controlling one opponent. You're stopping them from doing their stuff. You're taking their things. It's game over. 1v1 is done. But if you're playing multiplayer with four other players, or even if it's with 3 other players, as the game progresses, people get knocked out, and there's going to be less and less players. And then once again, you will become more and more powerful. The ability to recur things, the card advantage, the mind control, even just the big beaters. Just a 6/6 trampling, killing thing with protection from everything. It's just insanity. There's ways to gain life. There's ways to give stuff death touch. Even if there's stuff that you can't do, you can just steal that from your opponents, and you can just stop them from doing things. It is maybe not a lot of fun to play against now that I think about it, but it is definitely a lot of fun to play yourself if you like to play control, if you like artifact themed, if you like just beating your opponent with big stuff and just all these kinds of recursion shenanigans and whatnot. It is definitely a lot of fun to play, and there's even after many playtesting games, I still discover interactions in this deck, ways that stuff works together, because it has so many themes, because it has so many ways to play, and it is just a delight. Yes, it is. Well, it's still affordable. I mean, $61 or $62, let's say. So yeah, it is affordable when it comes to Commander deck. This is not a $300 Commander deck, which would be probably normal for Sen Triplets, considering Sen Triplets already has such a high price card on it. But considering that Sen Triplets is an expensive card, once you've got Sen Triplets, the rest of the deck is once again extremely cheap, and you could pick up the whole thing, including the Commander, for $62, which I think is totally worth it for something which commands so much power and just so much fun, really, when you think about it. So now we're going to remind you guys that we do have a Patreon page. If you like these videos, you want to help us make more, you want to check out the rewards, go over onto patreon.com/budgetmtgdecks. For as little as $1 a month, you really help out the show, and we would really appreciate it. Because of Patreons like you, we're able to keep the lights on, literally and figuratively, over here. Also join us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, where you can see pictures, behind the scenes stuff. We share non-budget upgrades, all that good stuff. And of course, if you want to have discussions with us, talk about new sets, new cards coming out, new commanders coming out, you can get into contact with us right there at Budget MTG Decks. Also, don't forget to subscribe over here on YouTube for the most powerful decks and advice everyone can afford. And if you do, also don't forget to hit the little bell button to remind you so you can be part of the notification squad. When a new video comes out, then you get a notification. Otherwise, you're in the dark, or you need to be part of the social media squad, let's say, so you get a notification there. I guess that's it. Thanks for watching. I'm David, and also let me know what you thought about this format. Did you like it? Did you not like it? Can we do this? Can we not do this? Go nuts in the comments below. I look forward to hearing your opinion. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.